Welcome to Mereba Esset. My name is Aster Asgedom. With me, I have Elizabeth Conversations and Christer Ove. Introduce yourselves, please. I start with Elizabeth.
Thank you, Aster. My name is Elizabeth Yihdego Conversations. I am one of the co-founders of Mereba Esset, and I'm also working in managing Mereba Esset. Mereba Esset is a social media-based platform, mainly Facebook and YouTube, where we want to have discussions, dialogue on wider issues that we think are very vital for our society. So I am part of this group that's aspiring to have these vibrant discussions about different issues. Thank you.
Yes, to add to that, so far we are only discussing in our language, mainly Tigrinya and occasionally Amharic, but this is, especially for us, this is the first time we are discussing it in English. So it will be interesting. Mr. Christer is a consultant of sustainable development, philanthropist, civil rights activist, a blogger and influencer. Please introduce yourself and add to what I just mentioned, a little bit your background and how we come to contact with us.
Yeah, thank you very much, Aster, for having me. Very briefly about myself, I worked in the industry for about 20 years, and then I have also worked full-time since 1998 with environmental issues and sustainability issues, and I was the CEO of an NGO here in Gothenburg called Ecocentrum for many years, and now I'm a freelancing consultant. And I feel that we have a lot of things to do to support the development in the right direction, and everyone has to do their bit, and I try to do my bit and try to use whatever I have learned through the years, and also put that into a context for the others to learn from, if possible. And we met. I met with Aster a few years ago when I was involved in a project where we had an organization in Sweden that was trying to establish some projects in Ethiopia and also in Tigray, and we had visitors coming here to Gothenburg and so on, and I think that was perhaps 5 or 6 years ago, something like that.
Yeah, and the subject we are going. By the way, you were also president of an organization called Engineers for Environment until recently. So you are working in different ways of sustainable development. I also met you in another network where we are working for sustainable Sweden development in Ethiopia. You are very much involved in that. I remember there was this delegation of government officials that came, and we received them at the county administration office. And you and your wife were honored guests there. So you are somehow involved in Ethiopia and also Tigray. The subject we are going to discuss today is building a democratic process, particularly the role of civil societies in building peace and conflict resolution. The reason we are going to discuss about this subject is you are very much, I rather say you are knowledgeable in these issues, because every time I talk to you, I learn a lot of things about civil societies, democratic process, inclusiveness, and etc., etc. So my first question will be, what is civil society?
What is? Well, I think that is what can be described as what people can do in when they work together and when they don't have a financial reason for doing this, because I think most ideas or many ideas are coming from a kind of idealism that you want to make a better life, or you want to improve, you want to make friends, or you want to make life easier for yourself and for your family and for your colleagues and so on. And that group can of course be wider and so on. But civil society is really the foundation. If you look at it from above, you can see that civil society is what the society is resting upon and must also take care of, because all the other parts of society, they have other roles. The industry or the companies are there to provide economy for people so that they can earn money, of course, and that is their task. And the government should take care of well, everything that is easier to solve on that level, when it comes to taxes and schools and nursing and so on. And then you have the educational system, which is mostly financed from the state or from the government, but they have another task. So you can see the society as kind of building blocks depending on each other, and the most important, I would say, is the civil society, because there you have the base for the trust and that you can rely on people, that if I borrow this from you, you can borrow something else from me, and we can agree upon the terms without writing a lot of papers or paying a lot of money. We can just help each other, and that is strengthening. That kind of bond is strengthening society very, very much. And I think that is also, since thousands of years, that has been the success for humanity, that we have been able to cooperate in that way. What has happened now, of course, is that we are so many. We are many millions or billions on this planet, and we still need to have cooperation on a basic level, but we are so many persons. We have billions of ideas, and we have billions of hopes and so on. And that is, of course, very complex to coordinate. But I regard the civil society as the foundation for the society, because we have to have a very human platform for negotiating basic needs with each other.
Sorry. Normally, we hear about civil societies passing by. We read it, and we, especially on media. but most of the time we don't just stop and reflect on it. That's why I ask it's important to start from the basic concept of civil society. There was this, I will share some graph that you sent me the other day, which was very interesting.
Yes, this is
yeah.
This is one way of illustrating what I just spoke of, that we have a society where civil society is an important part of the whole society, with a very special role, and it can be organized and it can be not so much organized. Civil society can be the Red Cross, or it can be different organizations also, but everyone, all persons have a civil life, so to say, and we are involved in each other on a basic level, and that is also part of the civil society, that we say hello to the neighbor and say, how are you feeling today? That is that can be life-saving for some persons, that they meet someone that cares. So that is perhaps the most important thing, that we are nice to the neighbor, or we just say hello to them or help them and ask them, are you healthy today, or can I help you with something, or do you need something, or can I walk your dog, or whatever. And then you have, of course, the big scale NGOs, the non-governmental organizations like Greenpeace or similar, but they are very, very organized, of course. That's also part of the civil society. That's also
what differentiates the society in the simplest way you mentioned is like such as going and saying hi to your neighbors, or inviting your neighbors to coffee for socializing and stuff like that. But it is like more unorganized social society gatherings, while civil society is often made of volunteer work of different interests. But rather confusing concepts that I would like you to elaborate, for instance, is civic society. There is like civic society, civil society. They are very close to each other, but I learned that there is a difference. Do you agree?
Well, you can put different labels on things. And I'm not sure if that help people to understand. Well, maybe it does, but of course there is sometimes there is a need to be very defined and very clear about what role your organization is taking, and what is the aim of the organization, and so on. And that can be very important. So we must understand that we are talking about several different layers here at the same time, and that can be very confusing if you start to mix or well, cannot differentiate between the different forms of civil society. I think just as a starting point, I think it's better just to understand that there is a space in society that depends on the freedom of speech and the freedom of thoughts and the cultural sphere, in a way that you can have music or drama, or you can have someone singing just for fun or for some audience. But it's I mean, what is also bringing a kind of long-lasting value to life, what you can do in the cultural sphere. A lot of, or some of the big industry is trying to earn money from the cultural side. I mean, just look at the well-paid artists today. They are in it for the money. They are not really contributing to the cultural development, perhaps, and that could be a danger. I think it's better to take care of the very local, very original forms of culture. I think that is very important. Perhaps it's not the answer to your question, but it's, I mean, it's quite complex, and we have to be clear on the different roles, the major players in the society, and that's why this picture, I think, can be illustrative, because these 5 circles here, with the small private businesses like a small taxi driver company or a small private company, or the big industry and the schools and universities and the government and civil society, all those 5 have a very special role in society. And I think that is, if you understand this, then you have a platform to discuss details on the next level.
Yes, to just maybe simplify the at least the way I understood what civic society is and what civil society is. Civic society is like an individual organization that is organized itself according to some interest with like-minded people, while civil society is a gathering of all those type of civic societies. And civil society itself is like, you mentioned, for instance, like private sector, the public sector, on both sides, and then you have the civil society, which is like a fundament of a very democratic society.
Yes.
That's how I at least understood it. But of course, as you mentioned, there is even another graph that goes in detail. But before we go to the next detail, maybe Elizabeth has some questions.
Thank you, Aster. I don't know, maybe you will be covering those questions, but thank you, Christer, for giving us this elaborated background of what the concept civil society means and the different roles of different actors in society. I was wondering, you mentioned a little bit about how the civil societies are financed, like they get their finances from governments and different actors, but at the same time, they get to keep their voices. They are strong. And I was wondering if you could give us, I don't know if it's possible, even a short analysis or description of how the Swedish civil society process, building the civil society in Sweden, how it looked like. I mean, now it's one of the strongest countries in terms of democracy and consensus building and other aspects of where we say are very good for a stable society. And civil society is one of those actors. And I believe in Sweden, they have strong voice, strong opinion. So if it's possible, like in short, like a brief kind of history, the development of civil society in Sweden.
Well,
Very good question.
Yes, it is. I would say that we have had continuous development for about 150 years, approximately, building the civil society. And it was very much trade unions, and it was very much women's issue, and it was a question of education for everyone. It was a kind of awakening, a social awakening 100 or 150 years ago in Sweden. And step by step, the society changed, and we had free elections exactly 100 years ago, decided that everyone should have a voice in the to select the parliament, and it's a long process, really, and we are not. I mean, we cannot be really satisfied, because we have still women are not paid as much as men for the same job. I mean, still we have a lot of things to take care of, and that are not according to human rights and so on. And we still have the old original people in the north of Sweden are not treated correctly still. I mean the Sami population.
The indigenous.
Indigenous people in the north of Sweden. They are still not treated correctly, and we regard ourselves as very democratic, but there are still a lot of things to be handled. It's a long process, and it's important, of course, to connect the civil society also to the political movements, because then you have a possibility to change the political course of a country. But it's not enough just to have politicians to take care of things. You still have to develop the ideas and the local development between people that gather together and build a small house in their village just to have a meeting, or have a space where they can meet and develop things that are important on a very local basis.
Would you say that you mentioned social awakening? If I recall correctly, the social awakening came after the devastating famine that struck Sweden in 1967, that lasted to 1969, and that led to.
No.
Wasn't it 2 years? 2-3 years, in period of 2-3 years?
I think the key development was in the years before the First World War, and the early 19th century. 1911, I think, was an important year, where we had famine in Sweden, and people got tired and really wanted change. And 10 years later, we had that everyone, at least most of the Swedish population, could vote for their politicians.
I meant 1860.
Yes, that was one starting point, but there were many starting points. I think.
But what was defining about that moment was, you mentioned about the unions workers, because during that time it was the famine was in the beginning in the Norrland, in the north part of Sweden, and people were trading labor to get food, and that was maltreatment that created these workers' unions. So it was very successive process, one thing adding to another, but correctly, as you said, it was the big social movement came in the 1920s, between 11 to 20s, after especially after the First World War. Which the reason I'm mentioning this is like, for Tigrayans, it is also a defining moment right now, because there is this social awakening where we find ourselves in a totally new territory, where we have been saying that we are part of a country called Ethiopia. We were contributing to many things since the beginning, and yet we found ourselves totally neglected, not only neglected, threatened to genocide. But the positive part of it, I see a social awakening of movements of different kinds. So to get back to the social movements that Sweden had, that led to eventually very well developed.
I think it's very difficult to compare Sweden and Ethiopia, or Sweden or Tigray, because we have not had. The last war in Sweden was with Russia, 1809. So that was, what is it? 200 and something years ago. So it's very, very difficult to compare. What you have to realize is that these processes are slow, and you have to really try to include as many persons as possible, even those that think differently. I mean, it's very important that you have different opinions, because if you just allow, or even if you just promote one idea or one solution, there will always be someone opposed to that, and go to war to change the ruling party, or there has to be some way of channeling or taking care of different ideas in society, and that the different ideas are respected. And I think that is extremely important for a society. And I think it's also important that the civil society opens up platforms for discussions, so that you can listen to others that you don't agree with, so that you understand how they think, and then you can at least understand why they are arguing as they are. But you don't have to win every fight. You can just leave it by that. Okay, we cannot agree, but at least we know that we have different opinions. And then later on, perhaps, you can understand, or we can find a compromise, or we can have a solution where everyone is benefiting from the solution.
That's very, very interesting, Christer, because different of opinion is one thing, but when you have like fundamental conflicting ideologies, for instance, in our case, there is this ideology that believes in diversity based on federalism based on diversity, which is connected directly to ethnic federalism. While you have this unitary ideology where everyone is just one, which is impossible, because there are a lot of ethnic groups in this unity, and you have like the difference also is in Sweden you have these basic fundamentals that all agrees on, which is a folkhemmet movement that created these fundamentals that everyone stands on. And the other differences are ideological differences that is possible to agree or also respect each other's difference and work together anyway. But what do you do when you have like fundamental different ideologies that are colliding, that cannot like go together? How do you do in this situation?
Well, that is of course a problem, but it's like playing football or something. You have to agree on the rules. And if you have someone on the football field that say, no, I don't like the rules, I have my own rules, then you cannot play. So you have to try to convince the fundamentalists that if we shall have a peaceful development here, we must agree on what kind of rules are we playing with, and what kind of society are we aiming at. And I can understand that that can be very, very difficult, but I think it's very important that you accept that there are different opinions, but everyone has to, in a way, agree on the basic things that everyone has a right to express their thoughts and ideas, as far as they don't limit other persons to express their ideas. And that is a kind of fundamental basis for democracy, really, that you accept that we have different ideas and that we accept the rules that we are playing with. I can take another example, and that is what is happening in the United States of America. It's very, very dangerous. It's very alarming in a way, what is happening in America, because one of the major parties there, the Republicans, are step by step leaving the playing field of democracy and are trying to establish other rules where they can decide who can vote, or they even try to storm the Capitol and so on. And that is very, very dangerous. So we have to be aware of these basic fundaments that the society rests on, that everyone has a right to express their thoughts and their religion, as long as it's not affecting anyone else's rights. And that is really fundamental, I think. And the role here for civil society is to establish platforms for the dialogue, because that is, if we leave that to organizations, to companies, or to the government, then we will have top-down solutions, and it's much, much better to build the society bottom-up, from where people stand and what they believe in and what they are rooted in.
Yeah, that's where the civil society comes in, bottom-up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Usually it's based on voluntarily individuals' initiative, rather based on interest, gathering people of the same interest, the same passion. And of course, these type of movements eventually lead to social economy, one way or the other. You were talking about the bottom-up approach in society. It's a basic fundament of democratic process. When you allow people to express themselves freely, organize themselves freely, it often creates this dynamic where people of the same kind come together with passion and create different activities that eventually leads to economic, social economy. That's what I
Yes, there is a connection, and I think we have to be aware of that we have only one planet and we have only one future, and we have to really take care of the planet, and we have to organize the economy in a way that we don't harm the future for coming generations. And we also have to earn money in a way that we are not reducing the possibilities for others to earn their money. And that is, it sounds easy, but it's quite tricky, because there is a dynamic in the economy between the person that has something and the person that doesn't have something, and that's what you're paying for. But if we understand that everyone should have a possibility to live a reasonable good life, then we must find ways to take care of the competences and the skillfulness and the handicraft and so on from every person. If I need a plumber, I call a plumber and he can fix my pipes in the house. And if my car breaks down, I call someone that is good at cars. And then everyone can bring their skills into the economy. And the trick here is not to have one winner, like in Monopoly or something, but to have an economy where everyone can profit from it, and that we can use everyone's skills on a better way, combining it perhaps with responsibility. I think taking responsibility, for instance, for farming in a smaller scale together means that the farmer knows exactly how many products he can sell, because the consumers, the customers, have already paid for them in a way, or written down what they are planning to buy, so he can be sure that he can sell what he's farming in his land. And that kind of cooperational economy, I think, will be one way to balance the economy in a way, so that we take care of what everyone can contribute with and make it more attractive also to take responsibility. I think it's a key word here, is responsibility, because if only one person should be responsible, he or she will have to ensure the profit and raise the prices, and there are so many unsureness in the pricing, so that he will try to use every trick to earn more money than he really needs. But if everyone is sharing responsibility for some products that are developed, the pricing can be just enough, just for everyone to be satisfied with. So we have to have a new economy where we take care of the products and we take care of the persons also in the economy. It's not fair that people should work 15 days or 15 hours per day and so on. It's not fair to have cheap clothing from India or Ethiopia or so on, just because everyone in Sweden want to buy cheap clothes. It's not fair. So we have to have a new balance in this one.
Elizabeth, do you have a question?
Yeah. So the key point here, it seems that agreeing on some kind of rule on how to play the game is very key. So everyone comes with an understanding that they will abide to the rule. And in the context of Ethiopian politics, that has been the missing ingredient, I would say, that everyone wants to make their own rule. Hence, you have these conflicts and disagreements, even on like basic things that we think are quite minor issues. For example, there is this huge disagreement on what kind of colors we have for our flag, for the flag. So, and so many other questions. So there is no common understanding on the rule that you said, like you have when you play football. Everyone is trying to write their own rule. And you said that, I understand that you've been to Ethiopia and Tigray, and now, like after 7 months of in this period that we are going through, I'm trying to understand how outsiders are they understand Ethiopia and how they understand the conflict that's going on in Tigray. And I wonder if you could reflect on your experience in Ethiopia and in Tigray and this, like the things that I say, the complexity that is actually a bit problematic for, I would say, for civic societies and for the process of democratization. And I don't know if you paid attention to those issues or just if you have been reading or just a reflection, how you thought, what you felt. Yeah.
I'm absolutely no expert on Ethiopia or Tigray, but one reflection I have is that what you should do is to put together a list of perhaps 20 questions that everyone should answer to themselves. And I think the very first question is, who are we? I think that is the key, the first key question. Who are we? How do we define the we? Because if you are too narrow there, you will have a problem. If you're too wide, you will have another problem. So to define who you are and what is defining you, and what do you want to be? Why do I feel like a Swede, or am I from Gothenburg, or who am I? I mean, it's a very fundamental question, and if we widen that question to us, to we, everyone should reflect on that and have a clear answer. Who are we? And then you put
sorry to interrupt you. As a Tigran, I would speak for everyone that we are going through. Everyone is asking that question at this moment.
Yeah, and you have to really carefully think about it. It's you cannot avoid it. You cannot put it under the carpet. You have to really, really, really think about that, because
if you see it in a bigger context, maybe it's easy for 6 million people to often it's the elite. In the beginning, it's the elite, and hopefully this time we are going to take the social movement even bottom up, so we will have consensus. But normally, historically, it's the elite that is always defining who we are. And now with the more educated population and the communication, the cyber world, making the world, the global world one, people start to question those who we are, definition. That's why we come in this conflict, like our flags. We don't identify ourselves in the flag they define for us. But the one flag is very symbolic and was dying for one group, while for the other group is totally oppressing and horrible to even think of, to have it as own. And you have like over 200 different ethnicities in the same country. So you can understand the conflict.
Yeah. That's why I think it's so important, because if you don't answer that, everyone should answer it for himself or herself, because it's so fundamental, it's so basic to understand what kind of community, what kind of country do I want to belong to, and let that really take some time, and let that also sink in, and discuss it and so on. What are the consequences if we think too narrow, or if we think too widely about it, and have a discussion. Also, perhaps discuss the older times, the historical parts, and so on. But more, I would recommend you to discuss the future. What do we want to be? What is the future? In what direction should we go? And how can we take care of all the possibilities that we have as a nation, or as a group, or how we now define our society? I think that is it's you have to understand, where are we now, where have we been, and where are we going to, and who are we? And if we have defined who we are, then the next question could be, who are the others then? What are they? What are they? Are they our enemies? Are they our friends? Or what are they? Are they unimportant or important for us? Or I mean, you have to work with these issues. You cannot avoid it. You have to really take care of it, and because I mean, discussing the flag is jumping too far ahead. The flag should be the result of a long discussion. You shouldn't start with the flag. That is absolutely the wrong thing. It could be perhaps the entrance point for some persons, just to understand the complexity. But if you want to really discuss these issues, you have to go beyond the flag.
Yeah, unfortunately, most of the time it's an obstacle to go beyond. The conflict comes there and it becomes like stop. So we can't go further. But
perhaps you should discuss food then. Everyone eats.
Yeah.
So what do we like to eat? What is our favorite meal?
Yeah.
Why do we like this bread?
Yeah.
That is so common in Ethiopia.
I think right now we are like more focused on who are we as the Tigrayans? Where did we come from? Why are we where we are today? Where do we want to go? There are a lot of discussions both on open media but also closed platforms, reflecting on that. So it's very fundamental questions. But to go back to our civil society discussions, civil society's role in this context, do you think it's like the civil society can also tend to soften these huge differences that there are between
definitely, absolutely. I think if you organize platforms like the one you're now organizing, and perhaps other platforms too, then you can have discussions on these issues, and you can try to describe the differences or where you have similar ideas, and see what are the strengths in the society, what can we build on, how can we build trust between people that used to be enemies, or how shall we try to develop a society that everyone feels that they belong to. We cannot afford to have people. That's also for Sweden. We cannot afford to have people that feel that they don't belong to society. We cannot afford that. Everyone has to feel that they belong.
Very key issue. Very key issue.
Yeah. So how do we do that? Well, we have to listen. Of course, we have to listen to all the stories, and why are they so negative, or what can they tell us, and how can we use that information in a good way.
Yeah. One thing I remember from the civil society, the beginning of civil society movements in Sweden, I was reading different books, so I'm like picking up from different books about one of them is this hur Sverige formades av den här svälten som formade Sverige, the famine that formed Sweden. And what happened was there was this influential individuals who went to China, Myrdal, the pair, Myrdal family, very influential family, went to China, and they saw the social movement there. Mao was mobilizing the population bottom up, and they were very impressed by that. So they came back and start to mobilize people. Why they say why can't we mobilize the same way here in Sweden? And that created some kind of elite discussion platforms where they were discussing, and questions were popping up. For instance, why do we have this ghetto? Because at that time the urbanization was beginning, so people were coming from the countryside and residing themselves in a very horrible conditions that made that the child mortality was high. People were dying of simple diseases, but people didn't know. They only know. I mean, the elite only knew that there are a lot of poor societies, and the questions were why do we have problems in the countryside? Why do we have this kind of ghetto areas? So when they find out that there is lack of knowledge, there is a lack of awareness, in order to increase the knowledge and awareness, we need to mobilize our people. So why can't we mobilize the same way as Mao did? So what they did instead of making it top down, they made it bottom up, that was based on interest. So people were mobilizing themselves in sport activities, like you mentioned before, in reading activities, different handicraft activities, etc., etc. So what happened then was, when the legislature creates a law, for example, related to sports. They draft a law, then they send it to these clubs, these interest groups, where the interest groups look at the ground if this works or not. So they gave referral, they gave their views on the suggestion. So the legislature then took and incorporated those different views from the public. So when the law was approved, then the people felt a sense of ownership, because they got the chance to participate in that making of this law. So when the law was implemented, they have no choice but to abide by it. And that was when the democratic process came, because when you have a society that is following rules, you also define, like, we have rules now that we agreed on. So that's when this democratic process was taking place. Of course, as you said, it's a very slow process, but that's how you create this inclusiveness and bottom-up movements. Do you want to reflect on that?
Yes, I think it was, we call it in Sweden, we call it social engineering. And it was very much a kind of, well, the Social Democrats had a very strong position in the mid-20th century. And, well, there was a need of new houses. There was a need of a second and a third vacation week for laborers, and we also have for every child that is born, there is a kind of submission, so that it's called the barnbidrag in Swedish, and that goes to everyone, not just the poor, but also to the rich, because it's then a fair sum per child. So because it costs more to have children at home and so on, and that kind of step-by-step building the welfare state was very, very successful. And it went hand by hand also with the development of the Swedish industry that was very successful in a way. Larger companies exporting a lot of things, especially after the Second World War and so on. And there was I would describe it as a kind of forward movement. It was, everything was going up and forward. People were living in better houses and have larger homes and better clothes, and step by step they could buy the same car that they produced at Volvo, for instance. That was a big step for everyone, that when they worked in the Volvo car factory, they could, after a few years, afford to buy one of the cars that they had produced. So that kind of progress was very effective in a way to build kind of expectation that life can only be better. And I think it changed in the 70s when people realized that well, the economy cannot grow forever, and the environment cannot take what we are doing. And then in the 80s, some of the wealthiest people understood that they could have a larger part of the cake. And then came Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan, and they changed very much of the economy on the global level. And since then we have had another kind of situation here for 40 years in our country. So it's all depending on different, well, what should we say, conditions. It's all part of the larger development, I would say.
One thing I always wonder is about this, of course, before this movement in 100 years ago, Sweden was top-down ruled country. It was elite in the maybe 10% of the population that were economically empowered and mostly knowledgeable, and they were all connected to the royal structure. So
and the church,
and the church, yes. But during this movement, something happened that I still see, but it's not clear for me, the connection, because I see, for instance, I remember in the 90s, when the industry, after the Berlin Wall was demolished, the industry was moving to Asia. So a lot of factories were closing here. I was in Norrköping, I remember, and the whole city was totally destroyed by this move, which led to a lot of unemployment. And when unemployment was increasing, there was this right-wing movements that were blaming everything to the migrations and everything. But then something happened that was very interesting. I don't know who that initiative came from, but there was this discussion of how should we move Sweden from manufacturing hub to service oriented. I don't know if it's the politicians. I don't know if it's like individuals that have influence, like yourself. But what I saw was suddenly there was this discussion of internet. And the politicians, of course, eventually decide. So suddenly the people who have work could buy through their company a computer, paying monthly some amount of fee. So suddenly I see this generation growing up with internet. Not only that, this generation creating a lot of softwares and young people becoming millionaires before they are 20 years. And it changed the whole dynamic of the society. And I still see that. Every time there is a crisis, I see movements, like invisible movements for me, that comes with ideas, but suddenly I see that idea have got an ear, and suddenly the government or the politicians are like taking it and facilitating whatever it needs to make it more realistic and doable. What is that? I still have a problem. Where is this connection? Who is doing what? How do they
doing what? Yeah.
How do they communicate? Because it's like most of the time I feel it's more private initiative, but somehow it finds itself to the power, and the power facilitates it. And before we know it, you are leading in that area. For instance, the internet.
Yeah, I think in Sweden there has been a lot of innovative engineers, and we have a history of always trying to find new products and invent new products, and there are a lot of examples on that. We were very early to adopt to internet and so on. I think it has to do with that we are a small country, and we depend on taking care of the possibilities and the resources that we have. And I think that is maybe the lesson for Ethiopia, just to think what kind of qualities do we have here in Tigray or in Ethiopia? What are we good at? What can we develop better than others, and so on? But I think what has also happened in the 80s and 90s is that we had a change in economy from the real economy to the virtual economy. And that means that I think I have heard figures that approximately more than 90, perhaps 95% of the economy today is virtual. It's just the value of shares or the value of something, property and so on. And the remaining 5 or 10% are milk and tractors and physical objects. And that means that the economy is really in danger, because if we change the value, if suddenly the properties are not worth as much as we thought, or the shares are not worth so much, everything will fall. So I think we are playing with a very high risk at the moment, and the economy is not stable. It's balancing on the 95% are balancing on the 5%. If you see it as a pyramid, topside down, and that is dangerous. So I think what we should have now is a more social economy that is based on taking responsibility in a more shared way, and that we slow down the speed of consuming. I mean, it's ridiculous, the speed today, how many products we produce and throw away in just very few moments. We have to slow down things. And we also I think we have to make every producer responsible for the product, so that, for instance, we should prevent producers from selling their products. They can rent them to customers, but they cannot sell the responsibility for them, because they know what's in them. They know what kind of dangerous chemicals and so on, or batteries or electronics and so on, are in the products. So they should be responsible for that, what they put on the market. Mm. And if we do that, then we will have much higher quality, because it's more interesting for the companies to have products that they can earn a lot of money on for a long period. Mm. If a product can last 20, 30 years and still bring income to the company, it will be much better economy than to have a product that only lasts 2 or 3 years. Mm. So I think that is one thing that we should really change in that direction.
Yeah, this is more rather in a more sophisticated society like Sweden. Yeah. While we in Tigray, we are barely trying to
understand.
survive right now. Recently, you wrote an article about the situation in Ethiopia, particularly in Tigray, after you've seen what the Swedish embassy or the foreign minister statement was issued. Do you want to reflect on that? What is your view on the situation in?
Well, I don't have the whole picture, but I think if the EU and the United States can be more critical to the development in Tigray, I think the Swedish government should also be more critical and make stronger statements about the genocide. I don't realize really why they are so silent, but perhaps they have other things to consider. I don't know.
They are actually saying it openly that if we admit it is genocide, then we have to take actions. And Sweden, as a small country, cannot afford to take actions right now.
Yeah, wow.
So it is rather disturbing. But we are grateful that you wrote article, and I myself shared that article at the Swedish embassy, and I hope it was like eye-opener for them that the civil society is watching them.
Good.
Because they can tend to be biased sometimes when they stay long in some area. But to go back to our discussion on civil societies, how do you think is the civil society movement related to democratic processes or development?
Well, it's very close connected. I mean, it's very important that we have a vital civil society in a democracy, and that we have possibilities to organize between elections, organize meetings and discuss things that are currently, for instance, the COVID pandemic. And other things that happen suddenly appearing. There must be ways of gathering people to work with things or discuss things and come with suggestions. Also to be a strong spokesperson for what people in general are thinking, and that so that the government feels that they can have not only their experts as a support, but also the general public in a way, having them to reflect on what is how they see changes and what they should be done.
Of course, civil societies have, as we earlier mentioned, that there is a possibility that they are peacemakers, mostly because you create platforms where people can meet each other and discuss of differences, and also they can also be peacemakers, not only solving conflicts, but they can also be peacemakers in different issues. Can you reflect on that?
Yes, well, as we have internet now, I mean, we can use Facebook or YouTube or different channels just to spread a word or gather people and so on, and we should definitely use that to react on things that we think is not correct, or that we think could be done differently, and so on. So I think we have to be very modern in the way of how civil society is also present in the virtual world, so to say. I'm not a fan of Twitter. I think Twitter is just a lot of shouting. I think Twitter is it's very suitable for a person like Donald Trump, but it's not for a good discussion.
Yeah, your blog. Which platform are you using when you write your articles?
I normally I have a send list for some persons that I know are interested in what I write, and then I, from time to time, I publish on Facebook. But I know that there are persons that are following my blog and reading everything. Yeah. Yeah. I'm close to 1,000 now. I at least over 800 entries now. So it's a lot of text.
That's very good. Very, very insightful articles. So I will.
I try to keep them short, because I know how I would like to read. Not more than 2 or 3 minutes.
Yeah. I can witness from the article you read about Tigray. It was amazing how very loaded it is, but very short and right to the point. So it was very good written in Swedish, of course.
Yeah, you can translate. Google Translate works.
Yeah. Elsie, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Do you have any questions to add before we go to our final questions?
Yeah, sorry, my kids were coming, so that's why I turned off my video camera. I was wondering about the civil societies in Sweden and their, I don't know if I can say involvement, but how they are amplifying what's going on in Ethiopia, in Tigray. Because the reason I'm asking this is, we often say that civil societies play like a greater role in changing the world. That's most of the civil societies, they have as a motto that they play a great role in changing the world. And it's also often said that they have this capability to adapt like rapid global change. So which means they are not rigid like governments. Aster was mentioning a good point why Sweden is, for example, really cautious about labeling the conflict in Tigray, the war in Tigray, as genocide, because they have to do the next step as governments or states. But civil societies, they have this freedom. They can afford to be a bit flexible to ideas and to entertain different perspectives. So from that perspective, for me, it's been like, I read, for example, lots of articles in the news about protests in Colombia, about Gaza. So I know that you have written about the war in Tigray in Ethiopia. So I wonder how the civil society in Sweden is taking it, how they understand it, or if you, I mean, I understand this is a bit a broad-ish question, but how are they approaching it? Are they trying to influence the government? I mean, most of them work on human rights, women's issues. Thousands of women in Tigray have been raped, gang raped. The sexual violence is quite rampant. What are they doing? What do you think?
Well, we have 190 countries in the world, I think, and it's difficult to find persons that are emotionally connected to every country. I think there are historical reasons for some of the connections that Swedes have. For instance, with the Palestine, Gaza conflict and so on. It has been going on. I'm so old, so I remember in the 1960s there was a conflict in Nigeria. It was a part of Nigeria in Africa called Biafra.
Biafra. Yes.
And a lot of Swedish people suddenly got very engaged in the Biafra situation. And a Swedish pilot, I think his name was von Rosen or something, he took a private plane and flew into Biafra with supplies. And that was a very big story in Sweden. And but it was like a candle in a way, and then it went away. I haven't read anything about Biafra in the last 30 years in Swedish newspapers, but it's just a reminder of that it depends on how the media is acting, what the media sees as possible interesting angle. I think when the two Swedish journalists were captured in Ethiopia, that was quite strong angle, but it was not so much about Tigray. It was about the Swedish journalists in prison for 400 days and something like that. So it's we are very much trapped, I think, in what the media is using for as a story, and then we are also very much depending on emotional connections. That people feel emotionally involved in different conflicts. And if you don't know any person from the Ugrai population in China, then you don't care about, I mean, you feel sorry for them, but you don't act.
Yeah.
So I think that it's on that level in a way that you can feel sorry for a lot of situations in the world, but you only act if you feel involved, and that is the key thing, I think, to this conflict, that too few persons feel involved. It's a sad fact, but we are humans.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it's also related to the excess of information. The availability of information in the world is too much to handle for the individual. So what media does is find a relation to what's happening. Is it relevant? I remember if any accident happened out in the world, they always ask, is any Swedish person involved in this accident?
Yeah.
And suddenly it becomes interesting for the individual sitting in its kitchen or in living room listening to the news.
Yeah.
So for that reason, like you said, places that are not interesting to the Swedish society in general doesn't get attention they deserve.
Well, you can look at that tsunami in Thailand.
Yes.
Thousands of Swedish persons were actually there in Thailand. And of course, that was a big thing.
Yeah.
So they got emotionally involved. That was a dangerous situation for a lot of Swedish people.
Actually, that was the biggest money collecting after the day after the tsunami event. It was like the biggest collection of money the NGOs gathered in Sweden just because of this factor.
Yeah.
Many people feel like this affects them.
Yeah, they had been there. They know the people. They had memories from that.
It was like a historic collecting money, as I remember it. So
yes, that makes me to remember one other interesting perspective on this, and that is storytelling. Because if you have stories about things, stories that can be told between persons, that can be very strong. That can be more. It's easier to understand on an individual level what has happened and so on. So if you want to strengthen the understanding on what is happening in Tigray, you should have stories. Because also the newspapers are interested in stories when it goes down to the individual level and gets interesting in a human perspective in a way. So that could be a way to put...
That's a very good point, I think. If I may add one question, a follow-up question. Like you said, individuals need to feel involved so that they can start amplifying what's going on in some part of the world. So they have to make it relatable to the society they are living in. So in that sense, we have, as a Tigrayans, we have a responsibility to create that awareness. But at the same time, I believe there is this language barrier, and we have had also information problem, because for example, the first like 3-4 months, there was nothing information coming out from Tigray, because the government has closed all the communication possibilities. So it was really difficult to get information, to get stories. Still, it's a problem, but little by little, I think there are coming lots of stories. So what would you advise us the best approach that we can follow to get the attention of the civil societies in Sweden?
Well, I don't have a simple answer to that. I think people like to read about heroes, and they like happy endings, difficult situations that went well in a way. I think there is a barrier all the time. If you start to describe all the ugly things in the war, people will not react to that. They will defend. They will not try to involve themselves. But if they can find a human angle to what is described, would I do the same? Could I be that hero? I mean, identifying themselves with a hero that did something, saved 3 children or whatever. I mean, that is much stronger than describing, unfortunately, describing 3 dead children. I mean, it's a sad thing, but I think we humans, we are very unlogical in that way. So, well.
Yeah, that's.
And we are also exposed to like endless tragic news every day. So it's
finding the happy moments in that, and try to shed light on that, to bring awareness about, without bringing all the dark side of the happening. But one thing I see in a way, a positive way of this war is, like, for instance, the Tigrayans are organizing themselves in a very, very structured way in a different interest, all to stop the war, to help our people. And this is very positive side of the war, because when the war was not there, we were scattered everywhere. There was, of course, engaged people in some issues, but now literally everyone is engaged and trying to do their best to help out. What do you advise to? Because our fear is, like, when the war is over, maybe there might not be this kind of engagement that we have been seeing now. What advice do you have for us? Especially I myself, but also Elsa, we are engaged in different associations in a leadership position. So how can we keep this moment, so this fire that is ignited as a result of this war doesn't die?
Well, try to put the right questions to people. Don't come with answers, but bring questions so that people try to answer the questions. Because then you have a dialogue, and then people have to think, well, what do I think about this, or is that important, or whatever. So be journalists, put the questions to people.
Yeah. Thank you. Now it's almost our final questions. I'm sure Elizabeth has also, but we were talking about the role of civil society in democratic process, and also as a peacemaker, and also solving conflicts. But one thing, when we speak of democratic societies, and also as a minority, Tigrayans, we are minorities. Of course, we have also other, even smaller minorities within Tigrayan community. But as a whole, from the Ethiopian society, we find ourselves being ruled by tyranny majority. Can you explain what tyranny majority is, and how it is anti-democratic?
Well, I think that is obvious. If they don't listen to you at all, then it's not a democratic approach. So democracy is not only saying yes or no to one suggestion or one minister or so. It's a process, and you have to really take care of democracy in every day and in every decision. So and it has to be fair. As soon as decisions are unfair, they lay the ground for next war, to be frank. I mean, the typical example is the Versailles Peace after the First World War, where Germany was humiliated. And of course, 20 years later, Hitler invaded, half of Europe as a revenge, because Germans felt humiliated. So if decisions are not fair, you have to be very careful, because then you lay the ground for the next conflict.
That's exactly what happened, because when this some kind of change, so-called change came, the two majority groups gang together, and they were saying like the majority that is ruling, without not acknowledging that you are majority doesn't mean you get to dominate everything and go outside rationality to just claim your own agendas. You have also to consider the minorities.
Exactly.
But there was no discussion on that, and this is also, yeah,
it's important, and it's a kind of contradiction, of course, because you want the majority to have a saying. That's why you have a majority. But if the majority is neglecting the minority, then you will have a problem. So it's a kind of contradiction. But I think if you're aware of it, you understand what it means.
But how is it, like, for instance, in events like election, you have the majority, maybe 51% that is winning, yet you have the 40% that have other voting. How do you incorporate such interest? How? I mean.
Yeah, well, that is one way of solving that is that the political side of society should not decide everything. A lot of things should be done without politics, and a lot of decisions should be made where they belong, in the local community, and where people know better than the top politicians. So it's part of the solution is to reduce the mandate for the politicians.
by making it the system we had, at least in Ethiopia, was federalism, where the power is supposed to go down to the people and less centralized rule.
Yeah.
But now it's the reverse. So would you say centralized rule is less democratic than
It doesn't have to be, but it depends on how much of the society is really controlled by the politicians. If you have, like in China, the whole economy is controlled by the politicians, then you have a very special society.
Yeah.
Or in Russia, and if everything is controlled by Putin, you have another solution. So, I mean, the balance, you have to have a balance between what the government can do and what the industry can do and what the civil society can do.
Those three graphs we were looking at before, the civil society, the industry, and the government.
Yeah.
So the ruling body have to find some kind of balance. Actually, isn't it rather the difference between the economically developed countries and non-developed countries are just this fact that there is free. It's not like controlled by some individuals' monopoly or some government interference in the economy. Rather, the people themselves have the possibility or the platform to be creative and find their way of earning money that eventually contributes to the economy.
Yes. There has to be a balance, and you should of course have the government to decide on things that only the government can decide. Railways, for instance, where to put the railways and so on. That should not be decided locally, and similar things. Perhaps the educational system should be decided on a national level and then performed locally and so on. So, well, you should control democracy by controlling the politicians in a way.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Do you have any question? Final question?
Not really, but just a reflection that from our discussion that in Ethiopia, everything is politicized. So we cannot say that there's a government and there are other actors who have different roles and responsibilities. It's like everything is decided by the politicians. So that's going to be quite problematic. But you raised lots of, I think, very key and important points, like how to find the balance and how to keep the bottom-up process. It needs like continuity, I think. You mentioned that. And from Tigray perspective, it's a very interesting discussion for us, I would say, and for our viewers also, because I know there is so many discussions around these issues going on. So I just want to say thank you.
Thank you. I have one last recommendation, that is invite a poet and let the poet sing or tell something, because I think that is part of the process, is that we put the culture in the center.
You know, that was amazing you said that, because since this change, since Abiy Ahmed came to power in 2018, the Tigrayans, the politicians went back to Tigray, not only the politicians, many Tigrayans start to look back to their hometown. And a lot of movements were happening. The last 3 years were amazingly a social movement that was taking place. One of them was just a culture center where one sister called Rahel Bulut created. So what she did was she created this cafeteria that people with poetry and paintings and different kind of cultural activities could come and express themselves. And this event became like Sakir. Many people were going, I think it was a couple of days a week. So to the point that she was forced to even move from the place because the interest got so big that she needed a bigger place. And the government was helping her to get a new place because they saw the youth was interested. And when the interest got more stronger, they were even teaching other youth, children. There was different activities. And we were like on the way. We were on the way. Things were happening. The elite was gathering in different interests, and the politicians were talking to the elite. Before was like Elsa said, it's just the politicians' top-down decision. Listen to me, my way or the highway. But these past 3 years, there was magical things happening. But at the same time, we realize now it was this movement was just happening only in Tigray. The rest of the country wanted us to be like what's happening in the other, the rest of the country, which was more centralized, controlled, and etc., which eventually clashed of also not this political or ideological differences I mentioned before. Now we are in war, and what we built the last 30 years is like demolished to the ground. It's very sad, but as you before said, that don't look back. It's good to know what happened in the history, but of course it's better to focus on how to look forward. That's why we are discussing this issue here, because many probably will ask, is it relevant to talk about democratic process or civil societies right now when we are like in the middle of war? But I say yes, because we need to look forward. And we have also this golden opportunity to create any society we wish. As I said before, you have a lot of knowledge. And every time I talk to you, I'm like enlightened. So of course, we want to share this knowledge with our viewers. So you are welcome, and we will definitely contact you again. But before we finalize, do you have anything you want to add as a final closing reflection?
Well, I think it's important, the job that you are doing. Keep doing it, and focus on the important parts, and involve culture.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Krister, for coming to our program, Mereba Esset, and sharing your wisdom with us. It's valuable, and our viewers also. I'm grateful you patiently listen to us, and keep listening, keep learning, keep enlightening yourselves. And also don't forget to share, like, and subscribe our program. Elizabeth, you want to say something, some final words?
No, just thank you.
Yeah.